They don't say it outright. They never do. It comes in other forms, edges of conversations, captions, and redactions no one admits to making. A glance at a screen and extra place setting a name not spoken. Captain Morris Young, and over-eager, had lingered after the strategy brief longer than he needed to. His voice carried too much brightness for a room still smelling of coffee and ink. I was collecting the last set of briefing notes when he gestured toward his phone. "Your sister throws one hell of a party," he said, showing me the screen like it mattered. The photo was familiar in a way that made my jaw go still. A long table polished to a mirror, finish full of smiling faces. The Grant dining room, same chandelier, same china, 12 adults, 5 children and Barbara at the head, holding a glass mid-toast. The caption read, "Grateful for family. Nothing matters more than who shows up." My hand stayed loose around the folder. I didn't say a word. He took the hint and left muttering something about drills on deck 3. Back in my office, the walls didn't feel any quieter. I opened the drawer I rarely touched. Inside was the old Zippo. I never lit a felted box with my father's cufflinks, and a photo I kept flat between 2 sheets of yellowed graph paper. It was taken in '97, our last Christmas before deployment. In it, I was holding the turkey platter, smiling in the way you do when you still think showing up counts. I unlocked my phone. The app was still installed, though buried under months of logistics platforms and weather trackers. The password hadn't changed. 7 photos, each brighter than the last. Haley in soft beige hair curled at the ends. Cousin Lacey from Minnesota, who'd once told me I was too intense for brunch. Uncle Dean laughing too hard at something no one found funny. I counted the chairs, counted the faces, counted again. 19. My name wasn't tagged. Not once. In the 4th photo, I noticed something small, my father's bronze clock on the buffet still ticking. The same one I'd rewired when it stopped after his funeral. They'd kept the clock. They hadn't kept me. I didn't reach for my phone to call Barbara. It rang before I could. Unknown number. The voice unmistakable. "Let's not make this a thing." That was her opening. No greeting, no question, just conclusion. I didn't respond. It was a casual dinner. Haley wanted to do something nice. "You wouldn't have come anyway. Not really your scene anymore." There was a pause, but not the kind that invited response. "I've spoken to the others." She continued, clipped and careful. "And we all agreed it might not be helpful for you to keep putting yourself in these positions." The way she said these positions, as if my presence were a logistical concern. She cleared her throat. "You've grown into something different. That's not bad. It's just not." She left the sentence unfinished, as if silence could soften intent. I stared at the corner of my desk, where the wood had worn smooth from years of elbows and unspoken thoughts. "I hope you understand," she said. Then came the click. Not a harsh one. Just final. I opened the lower cabinet and pulled out the fireproof case. Inside were original documents, the family trust, the property deed, the notarized signatures from the spring after my father passed. I had signed in uniform, still creased from ceremony. My name had been next to the lake house on Calvert Shore. Now it was gone. The updated version was dated 2 years ago. 3 witnesses, 2 signatures. A red line struck clean through my portion. Not erased, just replaced. There was no letter, no annotation, no explanation. I didn't tear the paper. I didn't speak. I folded it back along the original crease and slid it into its file. In the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection not out of vanity, but recognition. The collar of my shirt had loosened. My sleeves were still rolled from the morning brief. I looked like someone who'd been forgotten before she left the room. That evening, I made tea I didn't drink, let it go cold beside the window. Outside, the wind pulled at the flag on the west field. No ceremony, just motion. I scrolled through the rest of Haley's photo. In one, Barbara held a cake server smiling at someone cropped from the frame. The caption read, 3 generations of Grant women, legacy and laughter. Legacy. The word settled at the base of my ribs like ash. I remembered something my father once told me years before his voice weakened. People don't always cut you out to punish you. Sometimes they just need the photo to look better. I pressed the home button, locked the screen. In the drawer next to me, I found the velvet pouch with the silver ring he used to wear when he wasn't in uniform. The inside still carried the faint oil of his cologne. I held it between my fingers, then placed it atop the folder with the amended trust. I didn't speak his name, didn't say mine. I turned off the light and let the room forget I was there. Some people fold themselves smaller, not because they lack presence, but because it's the only way they're allowed to stay. I arrived at the church 20 minutes before the funeral began. The parking lot was half full. I sat in the car long enough for the engine to go quiet on its own. My uniform was pressed. My boots had been cleaned twice. I had debated whether to wear the medal or not. I left it in the glove compartment inside a velvet pouch behind the expired registration I hadn't replaced. No one met me at the door. I waited near the entry until the music started. Haley was already seated. Barbara, too. The front row had 6 chairs, all taken. An usher motioned toward the 4th pew. I nodded once and sat. After the service, I approached the casket like everyone else. I didn't kneel. I stood hands folded, eyes still. Barbara placed a hand on my forearm light as dust. You didn't have to wear that. It draws too much attention. She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the floral arrangements. I nodded again. That time I didn't know what to do with my hands. I left before the reception began. The program folded into quarters in my coat pocket. It stayed there until the ink bled. I used to send postcards on Christmas. Not long ones. Just enough to say I was alive. Sometimes with photos, sometimes with pressed leaves from places no one asked about. I sent Haley a birthday text every year, even when she didn't reply. Once she responded with a thumbs up. Another time, she wrote "new phone," "who's this?" followed by a smiley face I tried to decode for days. She never changed her number. The money I transferred when she lost her job came from an account I opened in Bahrain. I didn't write a note. She posted a week later about the unexpected blessing, thanked her, anonymous angel. I liked the post. She never liked it back. I still remember the sound the spoon made when I stirred my coffee that day. Slow, metallic, steady, like trying to smooth something that refused to dissolve. Family dinners were always framed around caution. I learned early which topics made the air thin. Barbara once cleared her throat mid-sentence when I mentioned a training exercise. "We're here to relax," she said. "No war stories, please. It's not Thanksgiving material." I offered to help with dishes. Haley said she had it. "Military people don't need to act like everything's a mission," she added, stacking plates without looking at me. During 4th of July, they handed out paper flags to the kids. Mine stayed folded in my lap. No one noticed. In those rooms, I became an expert at invisibility. I learned the exact volume that wouldn't interrupt conversation. I sat with my back to the window, the only place no one ever wanted for pictures. Barbara used to say, "You're hard to place, Eleanor." That's always been the issue. She once gave me a cardigan for Christmas 2 sizes too small, said it was all that was left in the colour that suited me. I wore it anyway. Even as the buttons strained. At Haley's engagement party, I offered to cover the bar tab when the card machine failed. Barbara smiled and touched my arm again. "That's generous," she said. "But let's not mention it. This is Adam's night." I nodded. "Again." The bartender called me ma'am 3 times. Adam never did. That night, I found a toothpick in the pocket of my coat, the kind they place beside cake slices. I hadn't had cake. Once during a particularly rough winter deployment, I sent a care package home. Local scarves, hand-carved figurines, little tins of spiced tea. Haley posted a picture of the box, tagged a friend, and wrote, "Look what I found at the market. Perfect for my shelf. No mention of where it came from. No mention of who sent it." She later messaged, "Thanks for the thing, whatever it was. You always had that intense taste." I read that line twice, then turned off my phone. The battery lasted 3 days. Barbara once held my hand in a hospital hallway. I had returned from my 3rd tour, stitches still tight across my side. She didn't visit the base. She waited until I was transferred to civilian care. Her fingers were cold. She looked down at my boots. "We just wanted normal," she said. "You never made that easy." I didn't respond. The monitor beside my bed beeped steadily. A nurse adjusted the IV and told me to breathe slower. I tried. Not everything needed to be answered. At one family brunch, someone asked what exactly I did. Barbara answered for me. "Something with logistics," she said, buttering her toast, mostly behind the scenes. She doesn't talk about it much. I lifted my cup to sip. The rim was chipped. I didn't ask for another. I kept coming back. Not out of obligation, but habit. Like adjusting the picture frame that keeps tilting on the wall even when no one else notices. I left gifts on kitchen counters and wiped the condensation rings from tables I hadn't been invited to set. They never locked the doors. They just stopped leaving them open. I used to think that was progress. Now I understand silence wasn't peace, it was the space they needed to keep things arranged just so. And I was the thing that didn't fit the shelf. I used to count how many times my name came up in a room. After a while, I stopped counting. Not because it hurt less, just because there was nothing left to tally. When I made major, I booked the flight without telling anyone. It wasn't dramatic, just a quick decision made in the dull green light of a base hallway. I hadn't been home in almost 2 years. The pins were still fresh on the uniform, and I thought briefly that maybe this time it would matter. I arrived on a Thursday. No one was expecting me, which I took as an advantage. I rang the bell. Barbara opened the door wearing a cardigan I didn't recognize, pearls fastened too tightly at her neck, her mouth lifted halfway. "Well, you made it just in time for Haley's cake," she said. Then she turned and walked back inside. In the kitchen, someone handed me a paper plate. Balloons framed the doorway. Haley laughed from the living room, surrounded by people who used to offer me gum at reunions. I stood next to the fridge, still holding my coat, watching as they clapped for her graduate school acceptance letter. Barbara set a candle on the cake. "No one ever doubted she'd do something elegant," she said. I waited for someone to ask what brought me back. No one did. I left my slice untouched, folded the plate, and placed it in the trash without noise. On the way out, I passed a framed photo near the stairs. Haley at prom. Haley at graduation. Haley in a cap and gown, Barbara's hand on her shoulder. There was a space on the shelf. I noticed it because it wasn't dusty like the others, a small square where something had been. The next morning, I found the guest towel folded on the floor outside the bathroom. A note on top, laundry's in the basement. You still remember how? I ironed my uniform in silence before heading back to the airport. The fabric steamed unevenly across the patch where a bullet tore through the sleeve 5 years earlier. No one noticed the mend. I still remember the bulletin board in the hallway near the garage. Haley's perfect attendance ribbon stayed pinned through 3 spring cleanings, mine curled at the edges, held up by masking tape, one corner folded in. Barbara called it practical. No sense spending on frames when you're always moving. Once, after a roadside attack left me in a field hospital for 7 weeks, I sent a message. Simple. No drama. Just, in recovery. Will call when I can. There was no reply. 2 weeks later, Haley slipped on ice outside a juice bar and cracked her wrist. Barbara posted a photo of the X-ray captioned, "We drop everything for our girl." The picture got 37 likes. At Christmas, I mailed a small gift box, handmade trinkets from Kabul, a scarf stitched by a woman who'd lost both sons to crossfire. Inside, I included a note about the maker, a soft thank you written in 3 languages. Haley posted a photo of it the following week with the caption, "Still deciding if this is art or a prank." I didn't comment. In the hallway closet behind old umbrellas and a box marked Easter, there was a photo album. I found it once during a plumbing repair I helped with, kneeling on tile with rust on my palms. The album was leather-bound, corners worn. A dozen pages in, I found the family beach trip from '98. I wasn't in it. Not just not pictured. Cut out. One photo had 3 jagged edges on the left, like someone had trimmed it to fit the frame. In the background, my elbow was still visible. I remembered that shirt white with a frayed pocket. I wore it the day I pulled Haley from the undertow. She got a seashell necklace. I got a warning for getting sand in the cooler. At one point, I'd thought of asking why the picture was edited, why no one saved the original. Barbara once said without looking up from her crossword, "Some things just fit better without clutter." She was talking about the pantry. I never corrected her. I kept the photo of the elbow, slipped it into my duffel one night when no one was watching. It lives inside the lining, tucked behind the zipper that's been broken for years. At reunions, I sat near the end of the table, not at the kids' side, but not close enough to be in the center photos. I learned to keep my fork from clinking, learned to nod when asked vague questions. Barbara once leaned over during dessert and whispered, "If you can't simplify your stories, maybe don't tell them at all." I remember the way her spoon tapped the rim of her teacup. Perfect rhythm. 3 times, then still. I stopped bringing stories. Even now, when I think about home, I don't picture the house. I picture the drawer in the hallway that always stuck on the left side, the one where they kept spare keys and unread mail. I once placed a postcard in there, from a deployment I wasn't supposed to mention. On the back, I wrote, "Still breathing. Still thinking of you." I found it 3 years later. Unopened. Still rubber-banded to a stack of unpaid lawn service coupons. I didn't take it back. I left it where it was. Sometimes being forgotten isn't cruel. It's just precise. Recognition doesn't need volume. Sometimes it's the absence of denial that makes a room fall quiet. I hadn't planned to attend. I hadn't packed a gift. I hadn't responded to the invitation that arrived 2 weeks late with my name misspelled on the outer envelope and no return address. It sat on my desk for 3 days before I opened it. The wax seal had already cracked. Inside the insert was thick, the kind of cardstock that whispered when you handled it. Haley's name in cursive. Adams in block serif. The ceremony would be held at the Garden Room on Radford Avenue, a venue I knew only because I'd once driven past it during a thunderstorm and remembered how the hydrangeas bent in unison against the rain. There was no mention of me on the seating chart posted in the foyer. I read it twice. My eyes followed the list of table numbers and last names until the rows ended and my own didn't appear. A woman in lavender heels reached around me to find her name. She smiled, pressed her fingers to the list, and whispered something about how close she was to the head table. When a server saw me standing nearby, he motioned toward the back of the hall. "Vendor tables by the kitchen door," he said. I didn't correct him. My chair was tucked behind a pillar. The place card read R. Grant in small font, tilted slightly, as if it had been printed in haste. The napkin at my setting was a different shade off-white instead of ivory. An oversight, maybe. Or maybe not. The glass was already half full when I arrived. The condensation left a ring on the wood. Barbara approached just before the first toast. Her perfume hadn't changed rose and starch. Her eyes scanned my uniform, then drifted sideways. "If anyone asks what you do, logistics will suffice," she said. "No need to make this about history." She adjusted a votive candle as she spoke. The flame flickered. Haley floated past in white sateen, trailed by bridesmaids who carried the same expression, practiced delight. She stopped to hug a cousin I didn't recognize. Her laugh bent at the edges. When the toasts began, Uncle Dean stood first. He raised his glass to love to new beginnings, to the future Haley and Adam deserved. No one mentioned where Adam had served. No one mentioned who had stood beside him when the ground gave out. Haley took the mic last. She was smiling before she even started speaking, like someone who already knew the end of the story. "To think," she said, "even my sister made it here tonight." A few scattered claps. "She guards greatness, you know," she added, turning just slightly toward me. "Doors, mostly. Important ones, I'm told." The laughter wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "She's always been our quiet sentinel," she continued, "standing nearby, never quite inside." Someone near my table chuckled. My water glass trembled slightly when I set it down. Barbara didn't flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on Haley. "Let's raise a glass," Haley said, "to the people who support us, even when they don't quite fit the picture." I stood. Slowly. Not abruptly. Not in protest, just because I didn't see the point of remaining seated. Adam was already looking at me. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't smiled. His hands rested on the table like they were waiting for permission to move. He walked forward, one pace at a time. Steady. Deliberate. Not the way people move when they're nervous, but the way soldiers move when the line has been crossed. He stopped exactly one step in front of me. The room quieted. Forks stopped mid-air. He raised his hand in salute. Sharp. Precise. The kind of salute not given lightly. "This," he said, "is Major General Eleanor Grant." The weight of the silence shifted. "She commanded my unit. She saved my life." Someone gasped. Not loud. "Enough." Haley didn't move. Her grip on the microphone faltered. It dropped to the floor with a hollow thud. Barbara's hands reached for her wineglass and missed. The music didn't stop. It simply stopped being heard. No one spoke. Not because they didn't have words, because any word offered now would have to be honest, and honesty had not been invited. Adam's hand lowered to his side. His posture remained straight. He didn't look at Haley. He looked at me. There was no apology in his expression. Just the stillness of someone who had chosen not to remain complicit. I didn't respond. I didn't return the salute. I didn't need to. The truth had already done what my voice never could. Some apologies don't ask to be forgiven. They just want to be remembered better than they deserve. She had already chosen the table, far from the windows beneath a chandelier meant to flatter no one. A single teapot sat in the centre, half empty. I noticed 2 cups, one untouched, one already stained. Barbara reached for the sugar packet and tore it cleanly. The paper fluttered against her saucer before settling. She stirred without looking up. "You made your point," she said. The spoon clicked once, twice, then stopped. No one expected a spectacle. "You've never been the type, but now the phones won't stop." She folded her napkin along the creases as if rehearsed. "You could have handled it privately." I watched her hands, still steady, still wearing the same ring she'd slipped back on after the funeral. She never took it off, not even when she cleaned. She reached for the teapot, poured a shallow inch. "I didn't know how to protect you without harming the rest of us." The cup sat between us, cooling. "You weren't easy," she added. "Always a little sharp around the edges. You didn't soften like girls were supposed to." A waiter passed. She didn't pause. "I told Haley not to say anything, but you know how she gets when the attention's on her." The comments were careless, not cruel. "Don't misread intention." I slipped a folder from my bag. Just a single page. The print had faded slightly, but the letterhead remained clear. Anonymous, unverified, dated 7 years ago. Her eyes flicked over it once, then again. "You keep old wounds well preserved," she said. I placed a second page on top. Linguistic analysis, 96% match. The signature wasn't there, but the phrasing might as well have been. Only Haley wrote irregardless with such certainty. Barbara traced a line along the table's grain with her index finger. "You were always so precise. Even your silence had posture." I folded the paper once, returned it to the envelope. "You don't have to do this," she said. "There's still a way to reshape the narrative. We release a statement. Clarify that the military thing was misunderstood, that Haley's words were misquoted or misheard. These things spin quickly. You know that." Her voice didn't waver, but something around her mouth shifted, a slight pull at the edge like fabric that's been ironed too many times. "It wasn't meant to erase you," she said. "It was meant to protect the family image. Keep things simple." I didn't speak. I adjusted my sleeve. The lining had begun to wear thin near the wrist. A thread had loosened. She leaned back finally, lifting the untouched cup. The rim left a faint ring on the linen. "We thought if we left it alone long enough, you'd come around. Quiet down. Be manageable." I remembered a time she'd used that word manageable while describing an antique lamp. It had a small crack down the base. She'd said it was fine as long as it wasn't noticeable. Before she could continue, I stood. Not abruptly. There was no ceremony in it. Across the room, Haley appeared by the elevator. She walked over slowly, sunglasses still on despite the indoor lighting. "You really meant to humiliate me," she said. "You waited all these years just to strike back during my wedding." I said nothing. She adjusted her cuff bracelet, gold with a single scratch down one edge, the kind she never let anyone else see. "It was a joke," she said. "You know how those things go." Everyone was laughing. "You just always take things so literally." I placed the envelope on the table between us. She looked down, then away. "I was 28, she said. "You had everything. The medals, the attention, Dad's respect. I just wanted to breathe for once without being compared to someone who never came home for Christmas. The elevator chimed behind her. I didn't think they'd believe it, she added. I didn't think they'd care enough to stop your promotion. The lights above hummed faintly. No music played. I picked up my bag. Barbara straightened her blouse pearls' neat mouth, folded into the expression she wore at charity luncheons. You don't have to carry this bitterness, she said. It's unbecoming at your age. I smoothed the strap of my bag across my shoulder. Haley crossed her arms. You always make things harder than they need to be, she said. Even now you walk like someone expecting applause. I reached for my coat. Neither of them stood. The folder stayed on the table beside the cold teacup, and the envelope no one would touch. There was nothing left to pack. Nothing to return. I walked out without the sound of footsteps behind me. I used to carry my rank like a second spine. The house was already furnished when I arrived. Nothing matched. The walls held old nails where someone else's memories had once hung. The floorboards curved in the corners, and the windows didn't quite shut. I kept a towel under the doorframe to catch the wind. There was a chipped mug in the cabinet with a faint floral rim, like something borrowed from a grandmother's kitchen and never returned. I drank from it every morning, not out of sentiment, but because it was the only one that didn't feel like pretending. I painted in the hours before the sun moved across the rug. Not landscapes, just small things, a single key, a worn coin, the edge of a curtain. I never signed them. They dried in silence near the back window, where the salt air softened the brush strokes. The postman left my mail on the windowsill instead of the box. He must have figured out no one else lived here. The letters were few, mostly catalogues and pension notices. Nothing personal, nothing with my first name. Luca came around on Saturdays. No knock, just the sound of shoes too big for his feet. He brought bread sometimes, still warm in the center, wrapped in wax paper and pride. Are you really a general? I handed him a glass of orange juice once. He drank it in 3 swallows. I used to follow maps, I said. Now, I follow light. He didn't ask what that meant. He ran off before the breeze could steal the screen door from his hand. There was a pine dresser in the bedroom with a drawer that stuck halfway. I kept my uniforms there folded beneath plain cotton shirts. I hadn't worn the stars in months, but I didn't throw them away. They stayed pressed beneath a field manual with notes in the margins and a coffee ring on the cover. The local grocer never asked questions. The woman at the counter wore the same shade of lipstick each time, like a ritual. When she handed me the receipt, she said, "Take care," as if it were both greeting and goodbye. I saw a headline once in the free paper stacked near the pharmacy. Something about defense reform, something about whistleblower protections. My name wasn't mentioned. I read it anyway, then folded the page into my coat pocket and threw it away when I got home. One night, I made a list of everything I hadn't said in the last 5 years. It took 6 lines. The kitchen clock ticked 2 seconds behind. I never fixed it. The rhythm suited the silence. I found a box in the attic labeled Summer Things. Inside, a pair of sunglasses with a cracked lens, a swimsuit with the tag still on a yellow scarf. I kept the scarf and placed the rest in the donation bin outside the church I didn't attend. The neighbor's dog barked every evening at the same time. I never saw who owned it. I didn't need to. The sound was enough. It reminded me of the base alarm back in Stuttgart, always 5 minutes early, always the same frequency. Once I overheard someone at the cafe say, "She keeps to herself." It didn't bother me, it felt accurate. The first time it rained, I left the back door open. The scent of wet cedar moved through the hallway, reaching the edge of the kitchen. I stood barefoot on the tile and let it stay open. A postcard arrived from a place I'd never been. No return address, no signature, just a sketch of a lighthouse and the words you would have liked the silence here. I didn't frame it. I didn't throw it away. I placed it inside the mug with the floral rim and forgot about it until days later when I reached for a tea bag and found the corner damp. I didn't try to dry it. There's a kind of stillness that doesn't ask for anything in return. At night, I lit a single candle, not out of need, but because the flicker kept me company. I wrote notes in the margins of old books, even ones I didn't intend to reread. The ink bled slightly when the fog rolled in. I never locked the front door, not out of trust, just routine. Sometimes I opened the drawer where the commendations were kept, not to admire, just to remember where I'd left them. Once Luca held up a wrinkled magazine clipping. My face was on it, years younger in uniform. "Is this really you?" I nodded. "Do you miss it?" I handed him the last piece of bread from the basket. "I'm not done with anything," I said. "I'm just not trying to prove it anymore." He blinked, as if that answer had too many sides. Then he shrugged and asked if I had any juice. He drank it in one sip, crumbs on his shirt, and ran off again. I watched until the corner of his red shoelace disappeared past the hedge. I don't need anyone to remember this place. I just need to know I was here. There's a difference between being remembered and being needed. The first call wasn't hers. It came from a woman named Trish, smooth voice trained pauses, the kind you hear in fundraisers and airport lounges. She didn't say your family. She said the Grant family brand. "We're receiving increased visibility after the wedding," she began. "The image of you in uniform, it's powerful. It's circulating. We'd love to explore how to frame that moment in alignment with the message of unity." I hung up. The next day, Barbara called. I let it ring until the screen dimmed. She called again an hour later, and this time I answered not out of obligation, but to see if her tone had changed. I didn't expect it to spread. She started. "Apparently there's something in the way you are standing. People are assigning meaning." She paused. I could hear the scrape of a teaspoon against porcelain. "I told them you didn't intend to cause confusion. You just have that presence, but they need clarity, for Haley's sake. No mention of why I was standing at all. No mention of what was said or not said. She's preparing to launch a campaign," she continued, "a leadership fellowship for women. She's already booked a segment on morning television. We need to ensure the narrative remains aligned." That word again, narrative. I let her talk. I traced a finger along the edge of my desk, where the wood had been worn by heat and years. You could simply confirm that the moment at the reception was a misunderstanding, that there was no division, no tension, that it was family humor taken out of context. Her voice sharpened ever so slightly. "You've always been capable of discretion. Use it." The call ended with a soft, practiced goodbye. The email came from Haley the next day. No greeting, just a subject line. Small, ask big impact. She attached a media request asking for a quote from the sister. The one in uniform. The one in the photo. "Just something short," she wrote. "Maybe a line about how proud you are of me, how the moment was exaggerated by the media. It'll help keep things clean." She signed it with a heart emoji. No apology. No acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken since I walked out of that hotel. The week after that, a letter from a publisher arrived. They were preparing Haley's memoir for early release ahead of her speaking tour. One chapter focused on complex sibling relationships and the burden of being compared. They wanted my permission to use an altered version of the reception story. Protective older sister moment, they called it. A demonstration of shared respect between strong women. They asked if I had a quote. I read the chapter twice. In her version, I smiled when she joked. In her version, I blended into the crowd like I belonged. The next voicemail was from someone at a legacy media network. They were preparing a segment on women who lead quietly. They wanted to know if I could speak on camera about the power of letting others shine. I never called back. The mail kept arriving. Flyers with Haley's face on them. Invitations to her civic women's breakfast. Postcards with her smiling under a banner that read, "Building Grace." No one asked how I was sleeping. No one asked what I left behind. No one asked if I even wanted to be remembered. I received a typed letter with no return address. Inside was a clipping from a local news outlet, my name, my photo, my rank. Below it, a note in pen. You stood still when it mattered. That's what we remember. The pen had pressed hard enough to dent the page. I folded it and placed it inside the drawer where I kept my discharge papers and my father's watch, the one with the cracked crystal and the second hand that never caught up. Barbara called again. This time her voice was lower. "It's not about blame," she said. "It's about balance. You've always been difficult to explain. Let us help contextualize you." She offered to draft a statement for me. Something palatable. Something that would close the loop. "You don't want to be the one who ruined what she's building." The silence on my end stretched long enough that she added, "You can't hold on to everything forever." I spoke only once. "I'm not holding anything. I'm just not letting go on your terms." I ended the call. Later that afternoon, Luca knocked on the back door. He carried a shoebox with mismatched crayons and a sketch of a figure in boots standing in front of a blank wall. He pointed to the figure. "This one's you. You don't smile, but you see everything." He didn't wait for praise. He just placed the drawing on the table and asked for a slice of bread. After he left, I looked at the wall. No photos, no plaques, no timeline. Just light. They spoke my name only when it served them. I answer now only to the space I made myself. I used to believe that transformation looked like something. A ceremony, maybe. A turning point you could frame. But it doesn't. Not really. It looks like folding towels that no one sees wrinkle. The kettle lets out a breath before it whistles. I always catch it just before the sound rises. It feels less like boiling, more like remembering. Luca stood by the counter with both elbows on the edge, eyes fixed on the tea leaves. "How do you know how long to wait?" I held up the small hourglass I kept beside the window. The sand moved slow, uneven. The glass was scratched. "You don't always need a clock," I said. "Just enough stillness." He stirred the honey too fast, but I didn't correct him. A few days earlier, I'd received a letter addressed in a slanted, deliberate hand. The stamp was slightly torn in one corner. No return address. Inside one sheet of paper, cream-colored, folded once. They told me I shouldn't write this, that it wouldn't change anything, but... "I watched you speak at the Pentagon 3 years ago. I recorded it. I watch it every time I almost quit. Thank you for standing still when the rest of them turned away." It was signed Donna Brooks. I didn't know her personally, but I remembered the case. I remembered the silence around her name. I folded the letter again and placed it in the same drawer where I kept the tags I never wore again. I don't keep certificates on the wall, but I hung one painting last week. Mine. No signature, no date, just a stretch of coastline, a crooked pine and a bench that faced nothing in particular. The light fell soft across it. It's the only thing I've framed since I left. The organization reached out through someone I'd trained years ago. A quiet voice, even then. They asked if I would serve as an informal advisor, help shape a program for soldiers discharged under vague conditions, things no one wanted to name. No salary, the message said. No credit required. I said yes before I finished reading. I sit on calls now. Listen more than I speak. I review cases when asked. I cross out the noise and highlight the small places where a life unraveled. Most of them don't need solutions. They just need not to vanish. I sweep the kitchen floor every morning. Not because it's dirty, because I like the sound of the broom on wood. It feels like taking part in something that stays clean a little longer, because you cared. Luca asked me once in that way only children can. Why didn't you get mad when they treated you like that? I poured the tea slowly. I used to think their version of me was the only one that mattered, that if they saw me a certain way, it had to be true. He blinked like the answer wasn't what he was expecting. Do you still care? I handed him the mug. He held it like something fragile and too full. I don't live in their story anymore, I said. I don't even reread it. He shrugged. That was enough. I keep the pantry simple. 3 jars rice tea, oats. No labels. I know what they are by the weight. There's a shirt I wear often now, grey soft at the collar sleeves frayed. I stitched a small tear under the arm where no one can see. I don't wear it because it's flattering. I wear it because it doesn't ask me to perform. The woman at the co-op asked if I was retired. I said no. So, what do you do? I handed her a bag of apples. I help people who were told they didn't belong. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. I planted mint near the porch. It spreads without permission, wild and careful all at once. I trim it back sometimes, but not much. I like the way it claims its space quietly. A neighbor waved to me the other day. She didn't ask about the uniform. She offered me tomatoes. I accepted. There's no mirror in the hallway. I don't need to check if I've disappeared. Haley sent a newsletter through her foundation. Glossy photos, lined text. A quote at the top, "To lead is to be seen." I didn't finish reading. I turned the page over, used the blank side to write a grocery list. There's no bitterness in that. Just repurposing. Some days, the wind catches the front screen and lets it slam shut. I used to flinch. Now I barely look up. I'm not waiting for the sound of anyone arriving. I steep my tea 3 minutes longer than recommended. I like it stronger. Luca brings drawings still. Sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't. He never asks me to hang them. He just leaves them by the door. The ones I keep are folded, stacked between pages of books I never lend. He pointed to the painting once. Why is no one sitting on the bench? I smiled. Because no one needs to. There's something quieter than being forgotten, choosing not to be remembered. I parked 2 houses down, not out of fear of being seen, but to avoid the sound of gravel under tires right outside their door. The street hadn't changed much, the same hedge leaning too far into the sidewalk, the same crack on the curb shaped like a wishbone. The envelope rested on the passenger seat uncreased, sealed days ago. I'd written the address in block letters, each one deliberate as if clarity could prevent misunderstanding. I stood outside the fence. The slats were newly painted pale grey now, not white like before, a different kind of clean. Someone had trimmed the rose bush by the gate. The blooms looked pressed into place as if too much colour might disrupt the symmetry. I didn't reach for the latch. My name was no longer spoken beyond it. Inside the envelope, a legal declaration signed and witnessed, stating clearly that I relinquished any claim to the house, the land, the possessions, the family trust. It ended with a single sentence: no further contact is required or expected. Tucked behind it was a handwritten note folded once, no greeting. I'm not part of this anymore. Don't hold a chair for me at the Christmas table. Don't tell the neighbours I'm away on duty. I held the envelope flat against my palm before slipping it into the mailbox. Not forcefully. Just enough to know it wouldn't slip loose. I didn't glance toward the window. I didn't wait to see if anyone watched from behind the blinds. On the porch, I remembered the last time I rang that doorbell. It had stuck the button worn to metal in the center. Barbara had opened the door without smiling, stepped aside without words. That time, too, I hadn't been invited. A squirrel darted across the front yard, carrying something larger than its mouth could hold. I watched it climb halfway up the oak tree, then pause. A small, stubborn victory. I turned back toward the car. At home, I pulled the wooden box from the bottom drawer. The brass clasp had always been loose. I'd meant to fix it, but never did. I opened it slowly, inside my nameplate from my last post, wrapped once in a cloth napkin from a ceremony no one in my family had attended. I unwrapped it carefully, the way you handle something that once carried weight. The metal caught a sliver of afternoon light, then dulled. I placed it flat against the velvet lining of the box. Not to honor it, not to dismiss it, just to let it stop, waiting. I closed the lid, reached for the masking tape, tore a narrow strip. In pencil, I wrote, "Not for display, not for denial, just so I remember." The box didn't go back in the drawers. I let it rest on the shelf near the lowest row of books, the ones I reread slowly, the ones without underlining. A message from Haley came the next morning, a forwarded RSVP list for the upcoming holiday dinner. At the bottom in italics, "You're always welcome, but please let us know in advance this time so we can plan seating accordingly." I didn't respond. Barbara left a voicemail later. No introduction. "I assume you're handling this with as much control as you handled everything else. We all make decisions, Eleanor. Some of us just make them quieter." She paused. A breath, maybe. Then, "You could have kept one foot in. You didn't have to vanish." I turned off the phone without saving the message, or I boiled water for tea. Let it steep longer than usual. The taste turned bitter at the edges, but I didn't correct it. Some things are meant to linger in their full shape. The wind pushed at the screen door again. I left it unlatched. Let it move how it wanted. Luca dropped by later, left a feather on the porch railing. Blue, small, almost translucent in the middle. No note. I placed it between 2 pages of an old field manual. The chapter on recon strategy. I hadn't opened it in months. There's a kind of finality that doesn't need fire or sound. Just stillness. I swept the floor twice that day, not because it needed it, but because the pattern felt steady. I rearranged the mugs, not by colour, but by weight. I sharpened the pencil I used to write grocery lists, even though the lead wasn't dull. Some people measure peace in square footage or square meals. I measure it by how much I no longer have to explain. I thought about the house, the envelope sitting in its dark metal box. Maybe someone would find it tonight. Maybe not until morning. Maybe no one would speak of it at all. That would be fine. I hung the dish towel carefully, straightened the fold where it draped uneven. I sat down with a book I already knew the ending to. I didn't turn to the last page. There's a kind of stillness that doesn't arrive, it reveals itself when everything else has stepped away. I didn't set an alarm. I haven't, in months. My eyes opened the way leaves sometimes fall without warning, without force. The light hadn't reached the far corner of the room yet. It wouldn't for another hour. I wrapped the old cardigan around me, the one with the uneven hem. One of the buttons had cracked at the edge. I'd meant to replace it. I never did. The thread held well enough. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle by feel. The faucet groaned slightly from the cold. I let it. Everything has a sound when it's not being rushed. The ceramic teapot I used today was one I bought at a roadside antique market the year I left. A blue-grey glaze slightly chipped near the spout. I liked how imperfect it was, useful but unassuming. I let the water roll slowly over the leaves. No measuring spoon, no timer, just attention. The silence in the cabin wasn't empty. It was layered wind behind the walls, faint creaks from wood warming against itself, the distant rhythm of the sea striking rock. I carried the tea to the table and sat without straightening the cushion. The journal I hadn't opened since fall waited near the window. Its cover was faded from sun, the pages thinner near the front, from months of notes I never shared with anyone. I flipped to the last blank page. No preface, no reflection, just one line. I walked alone, but I was never lost. I didn't reread it. I left it open. The ink would dry on its own. Outside, the sky turned quietly. There was no sunrise, just the suggestion of light shifting behind cloud. The kind of morning that didn't demand anything from you. I stepped onto the porch. The wood was cold beneath my feet. I didn't flinch. The wind carried the smell of salt and wet pine, faint, but enough to remind me that nothing here was manufactured. Below, the sea continued its work, relentless, unrehearsed. It didn't mark anniversaries. It didn't commemorate. It just arrived. I stood at the railing and placed my hand on the post where the grain had darkened from years of weather. My fingers curled around it like they'd done 100 times before. I wasn't waiting for anything. A figure flashed past the gate, Luca jacket too big again, one shoelace trailing. He didn't slow down. "Morning, Miss Eleanor." I raised my hand in reply. He didn't expect more. That's why he got all I had to give. The screen door behind me knocked gently in the wind. I let it. Some things are meant to move without correction. I went back inside. The teacup had cooled. I drank it, as it was no sugar, no heat, but still tea. Still enough. I folded a towel that had already been folded yesterday. I didn't need to. The corners met more neatly this time. No one would see it. I cleaned the counter with the sleeve of my sweater. Not because it was dirty. I just didn't like the way the sunlight caught the dust. There was a voicemail on my phone. I didn't check it. If it were urgent, it would have come through in silence, not words. The letter I received last week from the veteran support group still sat unopened. I'd accepted their offer already. There was nothing new in paper. I'd show up, listen, and leave when my presence no longer felt necessary. I haven't hung a mirror in the cabin. I know what I look like when I'm not adjusting. There's a drawer that sticks when pulled too fast. I don't fix it. I just open it slowly. The nameplate from my last post still rests in its box. I haven't opened it since I wrote that line on the tape. I don't need to see it to know I was once called something that opened doors. I water the plant on the windowsill every third morning. Not because it needs me, but because the routine reminds me that something quiet is still reaching. The sweater I wear most days has a burn mark near the cuff, a small reminder that I once got too close to something hot and didn't pull back. Barbara never called again. The last words she said came through a phone line low and practiced. "You've made your position clear, Eleanor." But absence isn't the same as dignity. I didn't reply. Dignity doesn't need an audience. It just doesn't apologize for its stillness. Haley sent an article from her foundation. My name wasn't in it. She'd used a phrase I'd once said twisted gently. To serve quietly is its own kind of legacy. She didn't credit the line. I didn't mind. I boiled more water, not because I wanted more tea, but because I liked the way steam rose without purpose. Sometimes I watch it drift without catching it in anything. The mug sat empty beside me now. I didn't refill it. Some things only taste right once. The porch light had gone out days ago. I hadn't changed the bulb. I hadn't needed to. Luca's drawing from last week still rested on the table. A house with no door. Just windows. Just light. He'd said nothing when he handed it to me. He never does. I let it stay there. Not because it meant something, because I didn't feel the need to move it. They no longer call me by the name they once used, and I no longer flinch when they don't. I live now not to be seen. I live because I am.